This episode of Tales from Aztlantis is brought to you by Aztlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck. Because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromaztlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Representation matters. But as indigenous Chicano people, we can't just sit back and wait for mainstream media outlets to make it happen for us. And nor should we. We started the Tales from Aztlantis podcast because we believe that it is imperative for Chicanos, Chicanas, and Chicanx people to produce our own media and tell our own stories. And the way we choose to do this is by using Buzzsprout to host the podcast. Buzzsprout is by far the easiest and best way to launch a professional podcast. You'll get a podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and much more. To start your own podcast and get a $20 Amazon gift card, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you and helps support the show. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start a podcast. Now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so, and why that's so, and why that's so, and why that's so.
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to yet another episode of Tales from Aztlantis. We are currently in the heart of Yanawana in Texas at the world headquarters of Aztlan Libre Press.
Viva Aztlan.
Hey. Yes, sirree. And joining us today, for the second time, you're a return guest, so thank you for doing this.
Not only that, you're our second return guest, right?
Second return guest.
And you're also our second in-person interview.
Yeah, we usually do these over Zoom. So
that's right. So, I think the first interview that I did was on Zoom.
Yeah. So thank you.
By the way, my name is Juan Tejeda.
I was getting there.
You're getting there. I'm going to jump in here and start talking about me, and then nobody knows who me is.
Who is that?
So thank you for coming back. You are, I guess, part owner of Aztlan Libre Press, which you run with your wife. And I'm excited to have you here because today I want to talk about the importance of Chicano publishing and what does it mean to have our own institutions, our own means of putting out our own history. So, growing up in the Chicano movement, I was very inspired by this idea of self-determination, of doing things for ourselves, for telling our own stories, right? Which is a big reason why I became an archaeologist. Is I got tired of all these white archaeologists telling the histories and stories of my people. And the way I saw it was the only way to fix that is to become an archaeologist and start telling my own people's stories and be like a defender of the cultural patrimony of my own cultural matrimony and patrimony of my people. Mm-hmm. And so I see your work as extremely important. How, let's start at the beginning. What made you start your own press?
Yeah, well, thank you, Curly and Ruben Lacatecat, for having me back here on Tales from Aztlantis. And yes, we are in our office here in Yanawana, San Antonio, Texaslan, and the offices of Aztlan Libre Press. I'm originally from here, from Yanawana, San Antonio, but it wasn't until I graduated from high school in 1972 and went to the University of Texas in Austin that I took my first Chicano history course and got involved in to the Chicano movement that was going on in 1972 there in Austin, and that kind of just opened my eyes, and subsequently took all of the Chicano studies courses at UT Austin offered, and ended up getting my degree, my BA in Chicano studies and in education. I wanted to be a Chicano studies teacher in high school, but they didn't let me. Anyway, at least not at the high school level at that time, because they required 2 certified teaching disciplines to be a teacher, a high school teacher, and Chicano studies wasn't a certified teaching discipline in the state of Texas. Anyway, long story. So really, it was when I went to UT Austin that I kind of got involved in the Chicano movement. This consciousness developed in me of my history and my culture and who I was, my identity as a Chicano developed at that time, and began getting organized with different organizations. And it was the class there at UT Austin in about 1975 that I took with Alurista, Chicano poetry class, and that we published through that class. All the people in class we put together ourselves. He's not talking about doing it yourself. This was one of those do-it-yourself projects from the class. We published all 13 of us, including Alurista, and the title of the book was 13 Aliens. So that was my first sort of foray into Chicano publishing right out of this class. Subsequently, we had a group of writers and activists and people working with CASA, Chicanos Artistas Sirviendo Aztlan, and then Lucha League of United Chicano Artists there in Austin. And we began, the Conjunto Aztlan there in the mid-'70s also. And then later on in the 80s, 77 and 78, we began the Grupo de Danza, the Xinachtli, that was bajo el mando de Capitán General Andrés Segura. He started this group here in Texas back then. And we did ceremonia with him. So we were doing everything. We were part of this whole sort of Chicano movement and Chicano cultural renaissance, right, in the arts. We were artists, we were writers, we were danzantes, we were muralists, we were activists, we were working with different organizations and having programs in the community in music and literature and art. And we subsequently published about 2 or 3 more books, Tacincho, and then Arcoiris. And then we did a special Tejidos issue that was dedicated to this program that I directed there in Austin for about 4 years, the Festival Estudiantil Chicano de Arte y Literatura. Was run from kindergarten through the 12th grade in the Austin Independent School District. So we then published some of the work of the students there. So that's how I began publishing. But then I left, came back to San Antonio here in Yanawana, and began working with the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. And I worked there as the Chicano with an X, Xicano Music Program Director for 18 years, and started the Tejano Conjunto Festival there. And we started so many things there. This is a direct offshoot of the Chicano movement, right?
Yeah.
The Chicano cultural and artistic renaissance, right? The important role that these Chicano cultural arts organizations have played in the preservation of our history and of our arts, and the teaching of our arts also, right? And when the schools weren't doing it, right, they weren't teaching us anything, and for the most part still aren't today, teaching us anything about our Chicano history, Mexican indigenous history, and the arts, and the important contributions that we've made, and really the real history. I mean, the main contribution we've made as indigenous people is that they ended up taking all our land to start with. For the most part, we're reclaiming it now. But worked with the Guadalupe for 18 years. I began the literature program there. I headed up and edited many of the publications for the Guadalupe, like the Tonantzin. It was a quarterly magazine that I edited for a few years. And then the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center review and newsletter. And then about 10, 11 years ago, my wife, Anisa Onofre, who is also the publications director and the promotions director for Gemini Inc., a literary arts organization here in San Antonio. And she was working on publications for the organization, and she kind of said, why don't we start our own press? And that was kind of the impetus, and I had been involved in publishing in different aspects over the years. So we started Aztlan Libre Press, very modest, just her and I part-time, because we were both working full-time. And we published our first book in 2010, which was Aluristas, and it kind of came full circle, right? He was my teacher, and I first published with him in about 1975, 1976, Tres Aliens. Then 35 years later, the first book for Aztlan Libre Press with Aluristas' 10th book of poetry, Tuna
Nice.
Luna. So we started Aztlan Libre Press with that book. And now, 10, 11 years later, we've published 14 books and 7 XicanX Art Notecards with envelopes. And we're getting ready to publish our 15th book.
15th book.
15th book.
That's
Wow.
great. So from the time it took you, when you decided, okay, we're going to do this, to when the first book came out, how long were you able to get that book out? Like, when you made the decision, let's start our own press, I'm assuming, you didn't know right then it's going to be with Alurista, and you had a plan in place. What was that journey like to get to
That's
that?
interesting that you should mention that, because our first book was going to be, we put out a call for entries, like a national call for poetry in 3 languages, in Nahuatl, in Espanol, and in English, and they had to use all 3 of the languages within the piece, poetry or short story. And that took longer than expected. We didn't get the response, so we continued to put out more calls when we were gathering information. In the meantime, after 35 years, and I don't think I had spoken to Alurista or so, we spoke every now and then. He'd call me at 3 or 4 in the morning or something. Bien pedo. ¿Qué tal, carnal? ¿Qué estás haciendo? Hey, brother. So finally, we got back in touch and we started talking again by phone. He was in Califas at the time. He said, well, I have a new book out, I'm looking for publishing. I said, well, send it to us. And he sent us the manuscript for Tuna Luna, which I said was his 10th book of poetry. And we ended up publishing that first. So, the press has taken kind of interesting twists and turns, but I think that in a lot of ways, these writers that we've published over the years have really come to us, just like as part of this somehow divine master plan that they have for Aztlan Libre Press,
Nice.
that they just all of a sudden send us something and said, yeah, let's do that, right? Or we saw somebody and we talked to them, they said, I have a manuscript. Well, let me see it. Because we were talking about this earlier, after the initial years, the first 2 or 3 years of Aztlan Libre Press, and we had open submissions, right, off our website. We started our website. And we were getting so many submissions of, good works, and from a lot of different people, because there weren't that many Chicano presses, really, and still aren't. I think there were more during the times of the Chicano Movement, independent Chicano presses, than there are now, 50 years later. But anyway, we were getting so much work, and just goes to show that there was and there is a great need for indigenous and Chicano independent presses, because there are a lot of good indigenous and Chicano and Chicana and Chicanx writers out there that deserve to be published that are not being published because, the major 5 out of New York aren't doing it, the universities aren't doing it, and we don't have enough independent presses, our own independent presses, to do it. Mm-hmm. So there's a great need. So we had to stop taking submissions because we couldn't even read them all. And then we went to a different type of format after about 4 or 5 years. So we decided that we were only going to publish like 1 or 2 books a year, and give it some time and attention and promote it and distribute it and submit it for awards. So, there's been a real interesting, sort of evolution of the press and our thinking and our work over these last, 11, 12 years or so.
Yeah, well, how great is it that the first book was with Alurista? And for any young blood listeners out there who don't know who Alurista is what the importance that he had to the Chicano movement. He wrote what was basically started as the preamble, right, to El Plan de
Espiritual de Aztlan.
Yeah, Espiritual de Aztlan at the Denver Youth Conference.
1969.
1968 or 1969? 1969.
Yeah.
You know, he had, so if you're in Mecha, if you've ever been in Mecha, or, you know, you've seen his work, you've read his work, because at least when I was in Mecha, that the plan was a major part of the organization known as Mecha.
And didn't you also study under him when you were at UT early on? And that's how you got connected to,
that's right,
to
as I
El
mentioned.
Movimiento and to danza. Can you tell us a little bit of how indigeneity has inspired a lot of the work that you've done over the years?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Have you picked up your Mexica calendar for the year 12 Flint? Or how about a paperback copy of The Four Disagreements? Just visit talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise and show some love for your favorite podcast. That's talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, and it was in a lot of ways through Alurista and that first Chicano poetry class that I took with him that I got back into writing, and then published our first book out of that class, Trece Aliens. But Alurista was, you know, a very important figure in the history of the Chicano movement. And in fact, some people consider him one of the first, if not the first, poet laureate of Aztlan.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this earlier. He also was influenced by danza himself as a poet, and even by Andres Segura and Florencio Yescas in California, because he's from San Diego, and he was part of the Chicano Park whole movement when they took over Chicano
What they call
Park.
us the Toltecas
Toltecas and Aztlan.
Aztlan, right? That's right.
And we were talking about how he was influenced by danza back then in California, and through Teatro Campesino and Andres Segura and Florencio Yescas. So they had a band, a kind of a strings band that was called Servidores del Árbol de la Vida. And they used concha, which traditionally is used just in danza.
For alabanzas.
And technically you're not supposed, at least the way we heard it through Andres Segura, they were only supposed to be used in danza.
For ceremony.
But then they speak for ceremony through los concheros, right? And that's why the concheros are called concheros. La concha de armadillo, that's on the back of the little guitar, right? Concha. But they had a group, and I think it was with Juan Felipe Herrera and various other people that were singing cantos and original cantos and very working class and spiritual. So, and of course, Alurista, when he was here, he had already started, he had done the first Floricanto, which was taken directly from the Inxochitl concept of flower and song, right, which is the term for poetry. So they started a literature festival, a Chicano Literature Festival in 1973, I think, was the first one.
Was that here in Texas?
No, it was in California. I think at Riverside, I'm not sure. So then the next year he came to Austin, started teaching there. And then I think a year went by, but then in 75 we helped him organize a second Floricanto.
Right.
In Austin, and then the third Floricanto in 76 in San Antonio. So that was the beginning of sort of my training ground, the Chicano movement, getting organized there, and the University of Texas in Austin, Alurista's class. Initially, I was involved in the first Mexican-American Cultural Committee at UT Austin and worked with Mayo, a Mexican-American youth organization, La Raza Unida Party, and campaigned for Rams Unis. And then got involved in more cultural and artistic activism, and we formed the Conjunto Aztlan there and danza during this period later on in the late 70s. So, you know, the indigenous part was super important because we got connected first, I think, through Alurista as part of the Floricanto, but then in this search for our true sort of indigenous selves. And as a people, as Chicanos, of course, moving back, I think it was with Alurista that we first started writing Mexicano and Chicano with an X.
With an X.
It was through his influence, you know, to get that connection from, with the X in Mexica to Mexicano to Chicano, and that historical progression that the Chicano took us back and was related linguistically, right, through to the term Mexica, right, with the X, and I started writing Chicano with an X back then. So that was a connection. It was a very important connection, I think, back to our indigenous roots, albeit somewhat romanticized, right?
Yeah.
That the Mexica y la danza, the impact and the important impact that it had on the Chicano movement in terms of connecting us to our indigenous roots, not just the term Chicano, Mexica, Mexicano, Chicano, but then we started getting involved in reading, Miguel Leon Portilla, and we talked about this last time. I had classes with Juan Luna Cárdenas, and we started doing danza, and Andres Segura came up here, and we went down to Mexico to do ceremonias and got involved in the whole Conchero tradition, and I was the jefe segundo for 9 years. Jose Flores is still the capitan now, and his wife, Sara Flores, la capitana of Xinachtli, that still exists, and they've been in existence since then for over 40 years. And I got out after 9 years to do something, but I'm still connected with the group in a lot of ways and do ceremonias with them. But that led us to the danza, right? And again, in the search for our indigenous roots. Even then, we realized that we weren't all necessarily Mexicas, right, or Aztecs in that sense, even though the danza played an important role, danza Mexica, danza Azteca, danza Chichimeca, have all those influences, interesting enough, and that we were comprised of different, indigenous peoples and mixtures, and we were all kind of in search of our indigenous roots, our true indigenous roots.
The way that I'm beginning to, since I've given it more thought, right, about what it means to be a danzante, especially here in the U.S., and us as Chicano Mexicanos who are in search of our indigenous roots and trying to make those connections with our ancestors. Right. And when people ask me, or when they notice that you have danzantes that are from different communities, you have people who are from Yaqui communities that descend from the Maya, from Otomi, etc. And then you have people who ask, how do you reconcile the fact that these people are not Aztec Mexica? And the way that I explain it now is like, think of a powwow here in the U.S. Yeah. When people get together at a powwow, you have people from different communities, from different tribes that come together for this event. Right. And the danza, in a way, even though it has its origins and has its spiritual aspect to it, in a sense, it's almost like that as well. Yeah. You have people that come from different indigenous backgrounds, but the danza itself is what kind of binds them together in that moment for that specific purpose of celebrating your indigeneity.
Right? And danza is very strong because it really resonates with a lot of different people. Like the grupo that I'm in, over the years, we've had people of straight Totonaco descent, Totonaco speakers in the grupo. We've had people from Nahuatl communities dancing in the grupo. We've had Pueblo people, Isleta or Dene people dancing with our grupo, Hopi, Chicanos, Purepecha, different groups coming together because it resonates with us, right? There's something there, and that's what I love about the tradition of danza, is it's a way, regardless of what your specific individual indigenous community might be, where you descend from, it's this way for all of us to come together and partake and express our indigeneity in a way that's meaningful and important and impactful for us individually, but also it engenders this community, right? It gives us this way to come together as a people and be like, this is something that's ours, and we're sharing it with other people, and I don't know, it just gives it this life that I think people are really, really drawn to. When you we've just had our New Year ceremony. Right. We haven't had an in-person ceremony since the pandemic.
A couple of years.
And we get together, and I just realized, I don't know, I was energized. Because once you started
you remember that you miss it. It's like you don't know you miss something until it's no longer there for you to access, like this ability to get together with your community and be in unison, and to have this fellowship for a common purpose and celebration of your culture and life. And each individual can interpret it however they want. They can view it as a prayer or however they want to express themselves. But the fact that we're together doing this collectively that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of wondering, how does all of this, your experience with all this, how has that translated with, like, for instance, we're here to discuss your work in the Aztlan Libre Press. How does that relate to all the work that you're currently doing?
Well, it's Aztlan, for one.
There you go.
Aztlan is an indigenous name, right? And it's Nahuatl-based, right? Nahuatl name, and ties back directly to the Mexica, and the Mexicano. I did want to mention, it's just like our people, the Chicano people. And if you want to define who we are, it's hard to define who we are because we come from a lot of the different indigenous and mestizo backgrounds, right? We're not a pure anything, never have been. In fact, that's one of one of the important things about who we are as a people. In a general sense, indigenous, Mexican, again, that general sense. People within the United States, though we call ourselves as Chicanos, right? We weren't from Mexico. We weren't really accepted by the United States. We're kind of in this in-between state. So we're going to name ourselves, and that's one of the things that was very important, that right to self-determination, that we named ourselves Chicanos, even though it had been used in different capacities before that. We took on the name of Aztlan as the Chicano nation. Mm-hmm. Which was very important.
Yeah.
And the one thing about that the danza did do, and I think that kind of completed, really the danza, in a lot of ways, was the glue that kept us together, that brought us together, and was really the indigenous spirituality, which was missing to the Chicano movement, that tied to the land and to that indigenous spirituality that gave us this... that was very important to us as a people and to the movement in general, and then the danza did that, I think. And little by little, we started, going back to our different indigenous roots, and connecting with those, be they Coahuiltecan, here like I did. I got out of danza, in about 85 or 86 or so. And even though I still believed in the teachings and the importance of the danza, but I knew that I wasn't completely an Aztec, right? Mm-hmm. And I knew that I had ties here to Yanawana and San Antonio through my father's Martinez Tejeda side, and I decided to pursue that, get out of danza and search for that, and then, take on more of my music and my work at the Guadalupe that was taking on a lot of time, but it was all tied together. So it's all, I think, very important work that we've done over the last, 40 to 50 years now as part of the Chicano movement through these organizations and things like Conjunto Aztlan, Xinachtli, Aztlan Libre Press. We just went to the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. 40 years later, the organization still exists and still doing some important work.
So when you decide to put out a book, because you said you don't take submissions,
right?
And so is it more of somebody you respect, because now you get to choose, right? You get to decide what you're going to publish.
Yeah, I still think that a lot of these books are chosen for us.
Yeah.
That's the way they turn out, because all of a sudden something turns up and goes, I have something, would you be willing to look at it? Okay, send it over. We're not really accepting submissions, but and all of a sudden we kind of get blown away and say, wait a minute, let's take a closer look at this woman or this guy, and books come to us like that, and we have put them out, and when we didn't solicit them at all. Other times we have solicited certain people, say, yeah, we definitely want to publish Reyes Cárdenas, we went after him.
Right.
We definitely want to publish Larian Guerrero from here because she was a San Antonio Poet Laureate at the time, and Southside, homegirl here,
right,
del barrio, and she's great too. On top of that, there's always that, we try to publish the best people that we can, but there's a lot of people that just call you, they call your attention. They're important writers, and their work needs to get out. So we're contributing what we can to the publication of our history books and our literary and music books. I see these as our modern day codices that we're leaving these books, right, for our children and all future generations. So it's an important work.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, for sure. So when you decide to publish a book, and is there, just getting into the nitty-gritty of running a publishing company, right? One, it's super important. But before we even get into that, how many Chicano small press are there? Like, how unique is it to have one?
And us who've been involved in the Chicano movement and publishing on different capacities, there aren't altogether that many. God, I can think of, right off the top of my head, maybe only a handful here in Texas. A couple of that I know of in California, which makes it, I think, all the more important that, as I said before, there is such a great need. But like Flower Song, right, from the Valley here in Texas, and Jade Publishing I was talking about. There used to be the Birds out in El Paso.
The Birds?
That was their last name, the Birds. They had Cinco Puntos Press. They sold it recently, I think, to a bigger imprint.
Yes, they did.
But, in smaller kind of press here in San Antonio, Octavio Quintanilla does a La Brava Press, and a couple of little presses here and there. Está Claire Massey. Do you know who she is?
Yes, English. She's doing the Mapping Literary Texas.
Mapping Literary Texas. And she has various other presses that I wasn't even kind of aware of.
Yeah.
But there aren't, again, here altogether that many. Not in Texas, nor, as far as I know, across the nation. But there are, like I said, Tia Chucha's Press at different times have done publishing, and different kind of university-based presses that still do, Chicano, Indigenous, Latino. Arte Público Press still runs out of University of Houston. University of Arizona Press had, bilingual press that they focus on Chicano, Latino, Indigenous.
Isn't Somos en Escrito also?
They're starting to publish too. They just
are they from Texas or California?
I think he's from California.
California, right?
Yeah. ¿Cómo se llama? Armando Arandon. Yeah.
Arandon.
They started publishing also.
Chicano Manifesto. That's his.
Yeah. That was his book, which was very influential.
And he just recently republished it.
50 years.
50 years anniversary.
The 50-year anniversary of Chicano Manifesto, and I think they've published now 2 or 3 different books. That Chicano Sci-Fi,
right?
Yeah, was one of them, and then Ernesto Mireles' which was an interesting.
Right, Insurgent Aztlan.
Yeah, Insurgent Aztlan.
There's a chapter in there about me.
Yeah,
yeah. He sent me a copy, and I opened it up, and I was like, "Whoa, check it out!"
Yeah.
You're in the index.
Yeah,
I don't remember. I read it a while back now. I'm gonna have to look at it again, but. And little by little, I think more and more kind of people are coming out into publishing their own books. And, of course, they have the younger people doing zines. And there's still some Chicano magazines out there. Not as many as there were, I think, during the Chicano movement.
But what do you think the difference is between what was happening during the Movimiento days and what's happening now? Like, what do you see are the major differences between those two eras?
I think it was how we were all just kind of, as a people and a culture, society, this country, the whole world, caught up in the whole civil rights movement, and coming to terms with our identity, the issues that involve our people, and social justice. This whole explosion of Chicanismo and the Chicano movement is part of the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the women's feminist movement, the hippie movement, this whole drugs. And I remember, Carlos Castañeda and his books having this big influence on me as a young...
the teachings
Tales of Power, the teachings of Don Juan. It was the first time, I think, that I read something, and I was, just started going out of high school, going to UT Austin, where something was written from more of an indigenous perspective, right? And a philosophy, right? A spirituality, this history of our people, and they lifted us, and of course, it was perfect for the times of the 60s and moving to the late 60s and early 70s when I think the first book came out, with the whole mind altering and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the raising of one's consciousness and spiritual consciousness also, and connecting with our indigenous roots, right? And this then just kind of blew everybody's mind away, as it did mine, right? Yeah. Just like when I read, the Brown Buffalo for the first time.
It
had a big impact, on me. And then Revolt of the Cockroach People, the two very early sort of important novels about coming to terms with who you are and your indigenous reality, your Mexican Chicano reality, and the Movimiento Chicano, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the Revolt of the Cockroach People and the works of Oscar Zeta Acosta, because it doesn't seem like he's really getting the recognition.
Well, there was that documentary that came out.
That's what I mean,
right?
Not until recently has he really been getting a broader recognition as this
early Chicano
thinker. And
before the movimiento even gets started.
There weren't any Chicano novels. Chicano lit was just coming to its fore and to its own. The early days of Chicano lit and the Chicano movement, right? And the whole Chicano Renaissance.
What was that one by Ernesto? Is it Galarza? Barrio Boy. That's one of the first, one of the early. That's not the earliest, because I have found some going back to the late 1800s and early 1900s. But as far as within the Chicano literary canon, he's one of the first, if not the first one, who uses the word Chicano as a self-referent for himself and his experience as a Mexican American here in the United States.
And there was a novel called Pocho, I think.
Right?
Yeah. Who was the author?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I forget right up. But that was one of the early ones.
I think I have that book in a box somewhere.
And then moving into the 80s, where I think the Chicanas and Chicana literature started to really rise up, and Chicana feminism, and Ana Castillo, and then shortly thereafter, Sandra Cisneros kind of came to her own with the house on Mango Street, and that's kind of whole explosion of Chicana literature.
Yeah.
As part of the Chicano movement.
Was it that one?
It is. What's his name?
Jose Antonio Villarreal.
Jose Antonio Villarreal. That's right. The internet is a wondrous thing.
Google it.
Google it.
Well, the thing, real briefly, getting back to Oscar Zeta Acosta, is I'm surprised that he wasn't more well known, considering that he used to hang out with Hunter S. Thompson. Yeah. Everybody knows who Hunter S. Thompson is. Yeah. But I think what's interesting is, Acosta appears in his books and his stories, but he gives him this fictional identity, right? He describes him as my Samoan lawyer or
300-pound Samoan lawyer or something,
And so he never really, this Chicano movement. I mean, and you could see some of it in the movie version of Fear and Loathing. They show Oscar Zeta Acosta in his office, and you could see the Huelga posters on the walls and stuff. So there's this inferential, allusions to him being tied to the Chicano movement. But I think he deserves more notoriety. Personally, I really like his books.
Well, you know that how his two books supposedly got published is that Oscar Zeta Acosta ended up suing, ¿cómo se llama? El escritor you just mentioned.
Hunter S. Thompson.
Hunter Thompson. And Rolling Stone magazine, because Rolling Stone magazine published a book by Hunter Thompson. I don't know if it was Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, if he did that. If that was the book, it might have been, because Zeta Acosta was hanging out with Hunter Thompson. And supposedly it was Oscar Zeta that gave Hunter this idea for what they called gonzo journalism, and talking about your own self as part of the context. And they were doing all these drugs, and using him in the novel and not giving him credit, and taking direct passage that supposedly Oscar Zeta wrote and not giving him credit. So he sued Rolling Stone magazine and Hunter, and part of the deal, the settlement for that, was that Rolling Stone ended up publishing Oscar Zeta's two books.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah. Look it up. I'm pretty sure that's the truth. I've read those.
That must have been before he disappeared.
Yeah, because he disappeared, right?
No one ever heard from him again.
That's right. And that's part of the whole, I think, mystique of Oscar Zeta, that nobody knows what the hell happened.
So tell us about the mystique of Aztlan Libre Press.
Well, I think it's tied up in all of this, brother. My wife and I, we're both writers. We had a passion. My wife was working as publications director and started publishing books. I've been involved in publications. And we just felt it was time. There was a great need for it, and that there were a lot of voices out there that weren't being published that deserved to be published. And we were going to contribute what we can. It's a passion for us because little by little, we didn't, we worked in publishing in different ways, but not on our own. But we just jumped into it and got then Alurista's manuscript, laid it out here on our computer, got a cover. In fact, the cover was donated by Judith Hernandez, and this was an interesting, I tell you, things just happened. She heard that we had put it out on social media that we're going to be publishing Alurista's 10th book of poetry, and it was Aztlan Libre Press first book, and I had studied with him in E.T. Austin. Judith illustrated Alurista's first book, Floricanto en Aztlan.
Oh, wow.
Maybe we just saw it in the office here.
That's her.
She contacted us. Here again, Alurista ended up calling us. We called him, got a number from somewhere, and he called us and said, yeah, we have a book. She called us. I heard you're publishing Alurista's book. I published, the graphics for his first book, Floricanto en Aztlan. She goes, and I'd like to contribute the cover for Alurista's book.
Wow.
Nice.
So we ended up
coming from full circle.
Full circle, man, in a lot of ways, in real interesting ways. Like I said, these things happen for a reason, right? They're just not just the pura chiripada, or maybe they are this ultimate sort of serendipitous, had to happen because that's the way it is, or that's the way it happened. But anyway, so she adapted one of her paintings for Alurista's book, Tuna Luna, and gifted it to us for the cover.
Wow,
that's great.
Yeah.
Shout out to Judith for that.
Judith. Yeah. Judith's a great artist.
So one of the first books that I bought from Aztlan Libre Press was the one you did with Professor Gomez Quiñones.
Juan Gomez Quiñones.
What was it called? Indigenous Quotient
Stalking
words, right? And it was really impressive. It was right at the time that I was beginning to work on my doctoral work on indigeneity of Mexican Americans, and so I was like, this is, speaking of being serendipitous, this book came out right at the time as I was beginning my work, and I'm like, this is going to be very influential and useful to me in my work, and it was something that I actually used in developing my own ideas in my dissertation. So how did that come about? How did that collaboration with Juan Gomez Quiñones come about? And by the way, que descanse en paz, en poder. Yeah. El Juan,
Juan Gomez
presente.
One of our great historians.
Yeah.
And, you're in history, you're a historian. He taught at UCLA for, 50 years?
Something like that,
50 years, man, of work. Pretty amazing. So it was through Alurista, in fact. The second book we published, Alurista, was the Aztec Calendar coloring book, and that has been one of our most popular sellers still to this day, 10, 11 years later. Then Alurista said, man, you got to read these two essays by Juan Gomez because they're good friends. And we ended up getting in touch with Juan Gomez, and he sent it to us, and they're two sort of academic essays. I really like the subtitle, and it always kind of gets lost, but it's Indigenous Quotient / Stalking Words, and then the subtitle is American Indian Heritage as Future.
As future, that's right.
As future.
That's right.
Right. And really what Juan did, this was the first time that Juan Gomez Quiñones had really dealt with the way history here in the U.S. has dealt with the indigenous question, right? How they've treated the indigenous people. The first, pretty long essay, and then the second one is a shorter essay, and basically stating that, the American Indians here on this continent, he dealt more with North America, right?
Yeah.
Canada, the United States, and Mexico. As part of North America. Turtle Island, as some people call it. But anyway, that we have a lot to offer the world, through our connection to the land and ecology and to our philosophy and way of thinking and connection with the divine and the arts and spirituality and more natural spirituality that's going to help in a lot of ways, I think, save the world. And part of even this whole concept of, I know this is kind of have been shot down on certain levels, but this, whether we like it or not, Inlakech was prominent And he ends the whole book with a quote, which supposedly is attributed to the Opi. ¿Cómo se dice? We are the ones that we have been waiting for. Right?
Yeah,
have you heard that?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We are the ones that we have been waiting for. Right? And I think, the Chicano movement, that connection to our indigenous past, it's going to be a very important part of our future, and the future not just of our people, but of the whole world, and the way we deal with each other, and the way we deal with Mother Earth, and the ecology movement, and saving the planet and our waters and our air. In a lot of ways is going to be the salvation of all of humanity, and I really believe that indigenous connection is very important to the world. And that's basically what Juan's book in that second essay says, that we are important to the world because of our philosophy, our spiritual connection to the land, our relations with each other, and all our relations, right? That concept. So we published it, and it's been one of our popular books also. It continues to sell, 9-10 years later, and they've used it for various classes, primarily at UCLA and San Diego State University in California, and a couple of other ones over the years, but they still use it for the class.
Are these more like ethnic studies type courses, or are they history?
I think they are more ethnic studies, and still some general history and indigenous studies. Also. Right. Yeah. So, a big loss with Juan Gomez Quinones.
Absolutely. Well, when you decide, okay, this is a book that we're going to publish, what are the steps that you go through from the moment that decision is made to the moment you're shipping out copies? Like, what I imagine it's a pretty intensive process to get a book published and out, and especially there's only two of you. Right?
There are.
So, I mean, how's that?
And she's still working very part-time. I'm working a little bit more since I've been retired these last 5 years. But and one thing that I learned, I was talking about this novel that we're publishing by Silviana Wood, and we learned that lesson from her 10 years ago, because we were going to publish this novel by her 10 years ago that's called La Quinta Soledad. And now it's kind of been adapted a little bit. It's La Quinta Soledad del Valle. We worked on that novel, and we're working on it for over a year, and then we had a dispute with the author, and then we had a dispute about the contract, and we ended up backing out, and she backed out, we backed out after we'd been working on it for a year. So we learned a very important lesson, that we shouldn't be working on any books unless we have a contract with the author, because you never know what's going to happen. So we usually get a contract first, then begin working, and we've already seen the manuscript and read it, and we've decided that we're going to publish it, right? The contract just cements that and all the terms. And then Anisa and I both read it and proofread it, make sure there aren't any typos and anything out of place. And we edit the book ourselves, her and I, and then we lay it out on our computer here at home. We work from home, right?
What do you lay it out in?
InDesign.
Okay.
InDesign. And Anisa is more of the technical person than I am, but little by little she's showing me, and learning InDesign. So we lay it out, the inside, the text, with any lines or graphics that we want to use also, and the complete text, and, the size of the font, and what size of book, 6x9, 5.5 by 8.5 or smaller, and lay it all out. And then we work with, usually we work with artists, a visual artist, to design the cover for us, front and back cover. We sent out the book to get, if we have blurbs for the back cover, that helps in promotion also. So we lay it out completely, cover and inside text. And then we send it to the printer. And then the printer gets it back to us. And then usually we are a different type of press, and not all press do this, but since we only decided to publish one book per year or so, every other year, to give the book and the author some time, then usually we work with the artist to do a national book launch event, over the last 2 years, we did a couple of virtual book launches, but usually they're in person. Then we usually work with the artist to do a tour, and that's one thing that I think we do that sometimes other presses don't do, because we know that you sell more books at readings than just off your website, for instance, or at book fairs or mercados where there's performances and people are out there and they get to see the actual physical books. You know,
right.
Yeah,
touch them, look at them.
And you talk to people.
You talk to them, right?
Engage with them.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Very important, I found. And they're usually... And if the author's there and they're reading and they're there, they went to see him, they're more apt to buy it and get it signed by him.
Right.
So we usually set up tours for them, primarily here in Texas, but we have helped to work on certain national tours, like Dr. Xinachtli. He's just on a tour right now through California and Arizona again. He had done one before, and I had set up a Texas thing for him, and he's coming back to do a couple of other things.
So in a case like that, where they're doing a tour outside of the state of Texas, is that something that Aztlan Libre Press helps finance? Like helps
Not
them
necessarily.
travel? Okay.
Not necessarily. Usually the host organization, if it's a university or a cultural center, will usually contract Dr. Xinachtli, Roberto, and they might pay him a little stipend. Sometimes he's living in Mexico now. They'll pay his flight in a hotel or have him stay with somebody. We as a press facilitate that through promoting it on social media, all of these things. They usually contact us and say, hey, Xinachtli's going to be here in a little tour through Southern California. We're at the university, we'd like to order 20 copies of the book. Or we're at a cultural arts center, we'd like to order 15 copies. Sometimes Xinachtli will take it, so we supply them with the books. We usually give them a 30% discount to retail outlets, and so there's shipping, orders, and social media promotion that goes along with all of this. And then we also do promotion and press releases and try to get book reviews, which amongst Raza, they're too few and far between, and we need more book reviewers. Try to get press on it, in the different cities that they may be doing readings, and for our events, we submit them for awards. Right, some are free, some there's a cost involved, and a lot of times we pay that ourselves,
like a submission fee to be to consideration.
In fact, don't you have a book that won an award recently?
In fact, Edward Vidaurre's book, Pandemia and Other Poems from 2020, was a finalist for Writers League of Texas Best Book of Poetry. And then the year before, in 2020, Amalia Ortiz, the book that we published by her, The Canción, Cannibal, Cabaret, and Other Songs, won the American Book Award from the Before Columbus Foundation in oral literature. It's a totally distinctive kind of book and performance piece.
Right.
It's like a Chicana feminist punk rock opera.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
With a great title too. It should have it should have won, I don't know if there's a category for best title.
Yeah, the Canción Cannibal Cabaret is
I've been saying it in Spanish, Canción Caníbal Cabaret.
Yeah, and actually I think it's cannibal with two ends.
With two ends,
in
right.
English, right? The Canción is obviously Spanish, but cannibal. But our bilingual tongues are trying to get in the way sometimes.
We think in both languages sometimes, and
our minds.
It gets confusing.
And then Lorianne Guerrero, who's a South Side homegirl here from Yanawana, San Antonio. She was a former San Antonio and Texas poet laureate. The book that we published for her, A Crown for Gumecindo, based on her grandfather who had passed away. It won the Best Book of Poetry from the Texas Institute of Letters back in 2016. So, for not having published that many books, I think our books have gained some good recognition in the press, and various books, including Las Nalgas de J-Lo.
That's a great title.
Yeah.
and the Canción Cannibal, Indigenous Quotient, and Lorianne's book. And a couple of other books have been used for, Chicano studies and Chicano lit courses throughout the nation in different capacities. So
is it fair to categorize Aztlan Libre Press as an award-winning press, right?
Absolutely,
right.
Carnal.
Say it.
Hey,
say it.
We are
say it proud.
Big-time award-winning press, Carnal. Yes, sir. Hell yeah.
What's the next book that you have on the horizon?
Well, we're still promoting Xinachtli, and we've submitted him for all these awards, and he's on this tour right now. Because it's been less than a year since we put out that book. We put it out in October of 2021.
That's right. Times gets all screwy now with the pandemic.
I know.
Lose track of what's what.
And with him, we did like 2 virtual book launches, which are not the same, but anyway, they had to be done. But now we just signed a contract, and we just started working, and I mentioned it earlier, on our first novel. And in fact, it's the debut novel of this award-winning Chicana author and playwright from Tucson, Arizona, Silviana Wood. And this is her debut novel also. She's an older woman. She just turned 82 years old this past Sunday. And pretty amazing, both as a playwright and I think as now a novelist. This novel is pretty amazing, because she sent us now it was 800 pages. It'll probably be less than that. We're calling it a tour de force in Chicana literature, and I don't think that there has ever been a Chicana voice quite like the main protagonist and her mother and her grandmother and her sisters that are the focus of this novel. It's a Chicana, chick lit novel, and Silviana is amazing. So I don't think there is a Chicana literary voice quite like Silviana Wood, nor quite the protagonist in this novel. So we're very excited about doing that, and we hope to have it out before the end of this year in 2022, about maybe November or so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for anyone out there that is thinking about publishing a book? And we were talking about this earlier, this kind of do-it-yourself attitude that you have taken to this because of your experience in trying to publish. Is there any advice that you would like to share with our listeners about how to go about doing this? How do you get started even publishing a book, period? If you've sent it out to multiple presses and you've been rejected at every single turn, what do you do? What is your next step? What is step one to achieving, the success that you have with Aztlan Libre Press?
I think you just have to do it. Unfortunately, most of our writers are not being published because there aren't, I think, enough presses, or definitely not the bigs out of New York or even university-based presses, although little by little they're starting to publish more, indigenous XicanX, Latinx literature, but still not enough by any means. So we have to rely a lot of times on independent presses and Chicano independent presses that aren't that many. But when those things fail, just do it yourself. I think that self-publishing is becoming more acceptable now than what it was as a vanity press before.
Right.
With social media and websites and all of this, you can promote. There are different avenues for promoting that didn't exist back in the Chicano Movement days.
Yeah.
You had to go the traditional media route and do newspaper articles or do flyers and be on TV if you could get an interview or radio or something. But now, there's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's websites, that you can sell off of. And like I said, I think the stigma of publishing yourself is little by little dissipating. And what's important is for you to put it out, man. Put it out so that people can look at it and hopefully read it.
Yeah.
And you can sell it little by little on your own. I mean, it helps, I think, to have a publisher if you can, because the publishers, as we do, some more than others, help the author to promote, to distribute, which is very important. People think, well, after you publish it, that's it. No, in fact, as we said earlier, sometimes the work really begins after you print the book, right? It's very important to promote it, to distribute it, to get it out into the bookstores, into the libraries, to do tours, to get reviews, to get awards, to keep it in the public's eye, so hopefully we can sell a little bit. And we need to be able to support each other, right? And support and buy each other's publications, because if we don't do it, who will? And we're still, very iffy about, even amongst academia and people that are in literature. I mean, I wish all the people that are on my Facebook page and on our Twitter account and Instagram, if just the people that are supposedly into literature and Chicano art and so forth would buy a book or two, we would make a good amount of money, but they don't. Even the people that supposedly are into it, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Well, I used to own this little store, and it was, we had a very small but loyal and dedicated following that would come in to support the store, but when I see people out on the streets, even now to this day, after we've been closed for so long, they'll be like, man, that sucks that you guys closed. And I'm like, but you never came in.
Never came by, never bought anything. And if we expect our institutions to survive and our presses, our businesses, we as a people have to support it. That's all there's to it.
Absolutely.
Because again, if we don't, who will?
Well, the thing that, keeping with the DIY, which for me, the whole DIY mentality came as a direct result of the Chicano movement, seeing my mom involved in organizations that were publishing their own newspapers, right? We had La Cucaracha out of Pueblo, Colorado. Putting together our own community centers. We had La Gente Community Center. Our people just saying, well, we can't wait for other people to do this stuff for us. We got to do it ourselves.
Right.
And if somebody else does it, then are they going to do it right? Can we even trust it? So, fortunately, I think in a lot of ways, technology has sort of democratized the ability to get our work out there on a wide scale. And we were talking before about, getting back to Ruben's question about, what advice do we give to people? There are two different forms of, and technology. There's two forms of printing, right? You have the offset printing, which is like the traditional way of sending your book out and getting X amount of hundreds of copies. But now we have this digital printing.
And publishing on demand.
Which is what we use for Chimali Media. We use the digital printing and publishing on demand. And I think the quality is great. I'm very happy with it. What are your opinions about where people should go if they're deciding on putting out a book on their own, and they have these options? What, in your opinion, what's the better of the two?
Well, now there are all these sites on the internet that you can go, publishing, self-publishing. You can submit a manuscript to a little company on the web, on a website or something, and they'll do everything for you. They'll design it for you. They'll get the cover. They'll put out there. Sometimes they'll even sell it for you. Or you can go with Amazon. They'll do everything for you and sell it for you también and send you, quarterly reports, right? It's become a lot easier, is what I'm saying. Instead of you having to hire a designer, you having to hire a cover artist, and they got it one-stop shopping nowadays on the internet for publishing, and I think that's good, and it has helped to democratize, as you say, and put out works that some people are doing that, just self-publishing instead of waiting for, a press that might take 2 years to get back to you, sorry, we're not going to be able to do it. They're really bad and notorious about not getting back to you in a timely fashion, and most of the people are rejected anyway. So I'm a firm believer in doing it yourself, and one of the reasons why we started Aztlan Libre Press. Now, we haven't published one of our own individual books yet, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that, if you decide that that's what you want to do. The important thing is that you do it. And there's various camaradas out here that publish their own books, and sell it themselves off their personal website and so on. As I said, I think it's becoming a little bit more acceptable. There's still some awards and some, academic institutions that frown somewhat and will not let you enter if it's a vanity press publication, if it's self-published, right? That they won't let you submit, which I think is bullshit, but there's still some like that. But I think little by little it's moving away and including all these people. And again, the important thing is to get it out there, to do it.
Could you be someone who, as we do with Chimali Media, have your own press where you then self-publish your own work? Is that acceptable for some of these awards? Is that kind of like a
for some it is? Still for some it is not.
Okay,
as I mentioned.
So for them it has to be like a very established, legitimate publication with some history.
It doesn't even have to be an established, legitimate publication. It just has to be a different publishing company other than you just publishing your book yourself.
Oh, I see.
It could be somebody who starts their own press and said, okay, my publishing company is called De Volada Productions.
Yeah.
And I'm going to publish, Ruben Tlacatecat's book, and it's a different publisher. It's not you publishing it.
It's not me.
It's somebody else.
Okay.
That's all it takes.
Wow.
And anybody can become a publisher.
Yeah.
Just do it. You like something, you like a manuscript, let's publish it. Get somebody to work with you, lay it out, get a cover. And, we used to do it by hand. We did revistas, we did them, put it together with spiral bound, send it, got them Xerox, came back, collated them ourselves, put the cover page on there, stapled it, put the spiral bound, and vámonos, a publication.
All the fun work.
Now I heard that first publication of a while back. Somebody told me that it was worth over $300 of 13 aliens with collectors, that collect sort of rare Chicano books. Yeah,
I believe it. I mean, Curly's book here, the one he published, We Will Rise. Someone was asking me recently where they could find a cheap copy because apparently online it's going for about $300 as well.
Yeah. Do you have any more copies of that?
No, I just have my own personal one.
Yeah.
And how much is that one going for?
Yeah. Well, the thing I really like about DIY stuff is, and it's funny because the first person that I knew who published their own book was Xinachtli. When he put out the X and La Raza 2.
That's right.
I remember I bought a copy from him and I'm flipping through it and I'm like, how did you do this? Because I was all about that DIY stuff, but back when he put it out, I didn't know about all the avenues. I don't even think I had the internet. I don't think my family owned a computer back then. So I was like, how did you do this? And so he kind of talked me through like, well, this is what you got to do. Just put it out. And the thing I really like about it is we're not seeking validation from someone else.
That's right.
Where you pour all your heart into this book and then you put it out and people are like, no, it's not good
rejected.
enough. Yeah, you're rejected.
The publisher rejects you,
And it's like, not needing that validation, especially with Chicano stuff, right? It's like we decide what's important to us.
That's
we don't, and even coming back to the very beginning of the conversation about Chicano identity, the Chicano movement is, a lot of people don't realize this, but, we don't need anyone's validation to be who we are as a people. Like, we decided who we are. It's a self-declared identity that emerged from our own people, and that's what makes it valid as an indigenous identity. And we don't need, like, a blessing from somebody else, whoever they are, to be like, you are or you aren't. Like, well, who are you?
We recognize you.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so important about your work and about Aztlan Libre Press is having our own institutions and forging our own path, right? Doing stuff for ourselves, because it's like you said earlier, if we're not going to do it, then who's going to do it?
Yeah.
Who's going to write, and document our own histories? Who's going to tell our stories if not our people have to tell it, and our people have to put it out there, because if we don't, like you said, we can't trust anybody else to do an authentic, story, a real story, and put it out to it. And if we have to do it ourselves, if nobody's going to publish it, we'll do it ourselves. And that's what we're doing here. We're doing it ourselves for our people, telling our own stories. We validate our own selves. We don't need to be validated by anybody outside of our own people. Tell us who we are.
Thank you for doing what you do. It's important work, and thank you for allowing us into your home.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all this.
Thank you for lunch. And
patties.
And thank you for shout out patties.
And the plato de tripitas was delicious.
Hey, yeah.
And just thanks for taking the time to do this.
Well, thank you for being here in Yanawana and at our home and in our office here for Aztlan Libre Press. And for anybody that's interested, you guys check us out on our website, aztlanlibrepress.com. and has all our publications on there and other information about the press. And hope to be doing this for a number of years. I've been retired now for 5 years, but hopefully I have at least 20 to 25 more years.
Yeah, you do. Absolutely.
I'm a veterano already, but
you got more work ahead of you.
Yeah.
So where else can people find you?
And you have social media?
Yeah, Aztlan Libre Press has a Facebook account. We have a Twitter account. We have an Instagram account. And as on our website, as I mentioned, aztlanlibrepress.com. And little by little, we're getting our books out into different bookstores and cultural arts centers. We're at the Achuchas, we're at Centro Cultural de la Raza in San Diego. We're at Resistencia bookstores in Austin. We're at the Twig here in San Antonio. We're learning of new places. I do think that we need better distribution. That's one of the things, and promotion that we really need as Chicano literature in general, and publishing houses of our raza, and get it out there. And there's no reason why we shouldn't have our books, and should have our books, but we don't. In bookstores across the nations and libraries across the nation. So I think that's the next step, also really developing that mechanism where we can get our books out there into the bookstores, into the libraries, into the classrooms.
And into the Aztlan cafes.
Aztlan Cafe, yeah. We used to sell all kinds of stuff there at Aztlan Cafe.
Yeah, we need some more of those, people.
Yep. Ain't that the truth? And you know what I like to say about the truth? do you want to give us our sign-off?
What?
The truth is like medicine.
It doesn't always taste good, but it's always good for you.
That's what I'm talking about.
I think I've heard almost all of your podcasts, really? Brother. Yeah, I dig them.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Aztlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromaztlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase. Thank you for listening to Tales from Aztlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromaztlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.